FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
You know, I'm on sports radio a decent amount. I was on KNBR today, and that was very fun. If anybody here says, "Hey, I heard you on KNBR," I'll just say, "Cool." No free nothing or anything. But on a different situation, I was once on sports radio, and I told this story last night. But to me, it's just very evocative of what it's like to be on these shows. I was on sports radio to discuss who else? Barry Bonds. Yeah, funny that that's a topic of conversation. And the guy who was interviewing me, he said to me, "So, you say everyone who hates Barry Bonds is a racist. Is that your position?" And I said, "Well, no, that's actually not my position at all. I've never written that in my life. I mean, you can hate Barry Bonds and spend weekends playing in a James Brown cover band for all I care. I mean, the question is that there is a lot of racism in how Barry Bonds is covered. That's reality. The racism is there and how he's presented towards the American public for their consumption, and how sports writers tear him apart piece by piece. That's all I say." And he looks at me and he says, "Well, what about his head?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "What about his head?" Like he yelled at me. You know? I mean, my dad doesn't yell at me anymore. He yelled at me. And I said, "Well, what about his head?" And he said, "The size of his head is proof that he's taking steroids. Have you measured his head? Have you taken a tape measure and measured his head?" And I said, "What am I, his haberdasher? No, I've never measured his head. His head is big. His head is big." He's yelling this at me. I'm like, "Yeah, Ted Kennedy's head is big. I mean, I don't know what that has to do with anything. Is Ted Kennedy on steroids? I mean, you got a big old head. You see him, he looks like a Charms lollipop. I don't know what that's about." And then he starts screaming at me, "You're ducking the question. You're ducking the question. What about his head?" And I literally just went like this to my own head, and I said, "You know, this is the stupidest discussion in the history of the English language." He goes, "Are you calling me stupid? Are you calling me stupid?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I guess." I mean, by the transitive property of you creating this stupid conversation, yeah, I guess you're pretty stupid. And, you know, it just predictably got worse from there. The discourse did not elevate at that point. And then we went to commercial, and he leans over to me and says, "Dude, that was great radio." And that, for so many, is the politics of sports. And when the politics of sports, you know, isn't silly, it can be downright ugly. And in the book, you know, we talked about the stadium piece, but in the book I also, you know, talk about how the NFL worked hand in hand with the Pentagon to exploit the death of Pat Tillman. And I just heard that recently a couple of courageous people on KNBR actually chose to speak about that and criticize the NFL and the Bush administration for exploiting the death of former NFL player Pat Tillman, who turned down millions of dollars to fight in Iraq, only to then turn against the war and ended up dead at the hands of his own troops, a fact that was withheld from his family during a nationally televised funeral, and then his death was exploited for cheap PR. And the NFL played ball right along with the Pentagon. Anybody who heard his brother Kevin Tillman's testimony in front of Congress knows how monstrous this was and how it destroyed that family. And anybody who's followed what his parents, Mary and Pat Sr., have done since Pat Tillman's death and since it was revealed to them that he died by friendly fire has known how courageous they've been in refusing to let the U.S. government now treat him in a way in death he never wanted to be treated in life, like a G.I. Joe to goose recruitment numbers. And they've come forth with a very different image of Pat Tillman, someone who called the war in Iraq illegal, someone who was corresponding with Noam Chomsky, someone who is keeping an assiduous journal about his experiences over there. And they have questions that they want answers, like, why is it after he died they burned his journal? Why is it after he died they burned his uniform? Why is it after he died they were already prepared to lie to his brother Kevin, who was in his same battalion, about the circumstances around his death? They want answers to these questions, and they're going to get them, and they deserve our solidarity and support. That is another ugly side when sports and politics clash in the most gruesome possible way. And then, of course, sometimes it's so ugly it becomes farce. And when it comes to farce, there really is, whoa, the train just went by. there's no clown like Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. People may know this, but I've written about it, but George Steinbrenner now has ununiformed police officers during the 7th inning stretch when they play God Bless America actually stand there, and they put chains up along the sides of the bleachers. So when they play God Bless America during the 7th inning stretch, you can't then go to the bathroom or you can't go get a beer. You actually have to stand in place. If you sit, one of the police officers says, you need to stand up now. If you try to leave, there's a chain. If you duck under the chain, they say, don't duck under the chain. And this is all happening during the 7th inning stretch. George Steinbrenner was asked about it, and he called it a patriotic plan to restrict movement. Now, I want people to ponder this for just a brief moment. A plan to restrict movement during the 7th inning stretch. I mean, it boggles the mind when you think about it.